Hi, everybody, and welcome. This is Barbara Miller from Museum of the Moving Image. I'm so glad to be with you. We are, of course, unable to open the doors to the museum, where, among many other things, we have an ongoing exhibition devoted to the work and career of Jim Henson. As part of our remote programming these past months, we've had many conversations exploring Jim Henson's remarkable body of work, the puppeteers, designers, and the others who brought his stories and characters to life, as well as his enduring legacy. Tonight, we are delighted to welcome the creative team behind the Netflix series, The Dark Crystal: Age of Resistance, which of course is a prequel to the 1982 film, The Dark Crystal. It's a remarkable group of folks and an event that honestly would have been much more difficult to arrange if we needed to gather everyone in one geographic spot. So we'll be joining you from our homes in New York, in Los Angeles, and in the UK. In just a moment, we'll welcome them all here and hear all about what it took to bring the Land of Thra back to life. But before that, we look forward to welcoming you to Museum of the Moving Image when we reopen. In the meantime, we'll continue bringing you events like this one, along with a lot of other great content, including virtual cinema offerings, education programs, events that are part of our Sloan Science on Screen series, our online publication, Reverse Shot, and much more. Please just check out our website, movingimage.us. Some of you watching are members. Hi, members. So glad you're here. And some of you watching are new to MoMI, so welcome, and please consider joining our community. As you know, this event is free, but we sincerely hope you will make a donation to the museum in whatever amount you are able, so we can continue to bring you events like this one, as well as have the support we need to open our doors, which will be very soon, I hope. But as soon as it is safe to do so, for sure. If you scroll down a bit on the page that you are on, you'll see a link where you can donate. If you can do so, please help out. We have many guests tonight, which is fantastic, but I'll just give a quick introduction to each of them and then bring them all on at once. We have Louis Leterrier, the director and executive producer of The Dark Crystal: Age of Resistance. His directing credits, in addition to that, include Clash of the Titans and Incredible Hulk. Lisa Henson is the CEO and president of the Jim Henson Company, where she developed and oversees such productions as Splash and Bubbles, Word Party, and more. Lisa served as executive producer for Age of Resistance. Halle Stanford is president of television at the Jim Henson Company, where most recently, in addition to her work as executive producer of Age of Resistance, she was involved in creating Fraggle Rock, Rock On, as well as the just announced all new, for real, longer than 5 minutes, Fraggle Rock. So look out for that. Very, very exciting news that is going to be happening. Jeffrey Addis and Will Matthews were the co-executive producers and writers of Age of Resistance and are also credited as developing the series. They are busy both together and apart writing for film and television. And Brian Froud was the creature and costume designer for the Age of Resistance, and of course, the concept artist behind the original 1982 film, The Dark Crystal. I'm especially grateful to Brian and Wendy Froud as well for joining us, since it is midnight in the UK. I'd like to invite you all to join us on screen. Turn your cameras on, turn your microphones on. The 1982 film, The Dark Crystal, was co-directed by Jim Henson and Frank Oz. And it is beloved by millions of fans around the world who've been begging for a sequel or a prequel or really anything that brings back the Land of Thra. Various attempts were made over the years, and I'd love to hear from you, Lisa and Halle, in broad strokes. How did everything finally come together?
Whoa. Well, Lisa, do you want to jump in and I can tag team? Do you want me to start?
I could start by saying that it was really years that we wanted to kind of broaden the canvas of the original Dark Crystal. And it was really because Dark Crystal was a very convincing, real fantasy world. And it wasn't something that it felt like it could be from there. It existed years before the movie. You could imagine in the future what would happen after the movie. You knew there were borders well beyond the perimeter of what you could see in the film. And so for years, Halle and I and our colleague Blanca Lista on the film side, we really just wanted to go back to that world, and not to recreate it, not to remake it, but to further explore, to kind of go march in new directions in that land. So we developed a TV series for animation. We developed a feature film, which Louis was attached to direct. But it really just came to pass with Netflix. Halle, you should tell about Netflix, because it was pretty cool.
Oh, well, I'll definitely tell about Netflix, but I'll also say, you know, many of us on this call are fans of the original movie. Like, we grew up with it. It like informed us. And, you know, so I actually like brought my book. Like, this was my book, Brian, that I like had since I was, you know, forever, and, you know, sat by my desk and inspired me. So I've worked with the company collectively for about 27 years, but I came back in 2003, and that's when Lisa and I started dreaming it up. And we just realized it was like our Middle Earth, you know, it was our opportunity to go back and adventure in it. And we, you know, Blanca and Lisa were working with Louis on a sequel film, but the prequel at that time could only be imagined in animation. So what Lisa's referring to is that when we went to Netflix with the series, we did go to them initially with it as an animated series. And at the time it was more for kids, older kids. But when we pitched it, they loved it. And there were great fans there as well, Ted Biaselli. But they came back to us and said, you know, it's a soft pass. We love it, but we're wondering, could you think about it even bigger? Could you think about it with puppets? And for an older audience, like the original movie, and our heads like exploded. We were like, what are you saying? Like, what? So it was really a dream come true that we were able to develop it. But we always had from the very beginning the same idea, which was in the prequel, you always ask yourself when you're creating a show, why now? And so we said, okay, well, in the prequel, why now? In the story, it's when our hero discovers that the Skeksis are bad and that the Gelfling are threatened. And so that line has always continued. And Rian has always been there from the beginning too. And Brian Froud has always been there from the beginning, because we also built a lot of canon over the years before we got to Netflix. A lot of canon.
I'm actually really interested to follow up with that in mind on something that Lisa said earlier, that the film The Dark Crystal really left things around the edges that could be followed up on a before story and after story. And Brian, I wonder, because you were so you were so deeply involved in conceptualizing that world, and I'm sure, Brian, in your mind, it was a fully formed world. It wasn't just that narrow piece that we saw in the 1982 film. So you know, was the Age of Resistance, how it played out, was that sort of true to your vision of what was going to happen to the, you know, to that world, what happened in that world before Jen and Kira came around? I am not hearing you, sadly.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
So over the years, we've been developing, you know, ideas for Dark Crystals in various forms or other, which meant that I've been drawing, you know, almost ever since we finished the last one. But we developed the world in the first movie. You know, Jim said, you know, let's populate this world with all sorts of strange creatures, and so we always knew there was a lot more in this world that we haven't seen. And so it was sort of easy all the time when people developed you know, little byways when they would write novels or graphic novels, or, you know, when we came to actually do a TV series, it meant that there was so much we could explore.
Yeah.
And so much we could bring to an audience that you were right, that, you know, that it was a very rich, visually rich movie. Mm-hmm. And so you always, that's why I think it was so popular when it was on DVDs and video, is that you could always see something, you know, in the back doing something. And you, as an audience, you always want to know what that was. And so in the new series, we find out.
Well, I think it's a testimony to the richness of the world that it inspired. such an avid fan community that was so invested in wanting to know what happened before, wanting to know what happened next. And even though they were hungry for your company to make something, they didn't wait for that. And fans wrote their own stories and made their own films. And it really was the fan community that from my mind that kept that torch burning, that really led to that. And I wonder how that influenced the development of the series and your take on it. Louis, it would be great to hear from you, kind of as a fan coming to this, what that meant for you.
Yeah, because I mean, I met Lisa and Brian, Halle I met later, but as a fan, I came in. I was lucky to be a director in Hollywood, and your agent, when you have a movie coming out, says, okay, you know, what next? Who do you want to meet? You can meet anybody. And I said, well, the one company I really want to meet is Henson, the Jim Henson company. So we sat down, we spoke about everything, you know, so uncharted territories, and I told him this, you know, that obviously the Muppets were truly influential in my childhood, but the movie that actually, you know, sort of like made me an artist, in quotes, real big quotes, not like you, Brian, but was the Dark Crystal. It was full of poetry, and like Brian said, had so much. Was such a an adventurous creation, a bold creation that I wanted to meet the makers and the heirs of the makers. So we sat down and we talked about this and how I watched it every month since I was 10, and how I showed it to my crews to tell them this is how you do patina, matte painting, visual effects, etc., and you have to really go for the practical effects. And then Lisa said, "What about the sequel? We've been thinking about a sequel. What about going and joining us on this adventure?" And of course, I said yes. I've told that story before, but I then kicked myself because I was like, "Wow, you're such an idiot! You are so untalented. You will never be able to achieve." And and also I didn't know anything about puppetry. So years and years of development, going through storyboards, scripts, etc., animatics on the sequel. Made me understand how the world was conceived, how it was created, how puppetry worked slightly, and then the idea. And then one day, Lisa and Blanca and Halle called me and said, "What about prequel?" I said, "Yes, of course," because these are the questions I've been asking myself. The sequel is very interesting, but there are so many questions I had about how the world came to be and how that civilization came to disappear. So I said yes, absolutely. And they said, "What about, it's such a massive undertaking, we cannot do it in 1 or 2 movies, maybe as a show." And I had never done TV, and I didn't hesitate and said yes, of course. And then we had together an army of fans, and that's how we met with Jeff and Will, the master fans. We were like, okay, well, we need screenwriters, we need people to write that story, and then they came on.
Well, that's a great segue, because I want to talk a little bit about creating the stories for that sequel world, and I'm going to share my screen and show some pictures now while we talk to Jeff and Will. So as we've been saying, the world presented in the film The Dark Crystal was so rich, and there were so many threads that could have been followed to even to create the prequel. So there was such a big world to tell a story about. So Jeff and Will, as you work to develop the storylines for the 10 episodes, what guided your decisions about what elements to expand and what to leave out?
I think ultimately what did it was the characters and their arcs. There's just so much world and so much canon had been developed by the Jim Henson Company, by Brian Froud. There was a lot of material. There was the amazing YA books by J.M. Lee, who was a writer on our show, who's in that picture right there in the corner. You can see him leaning. And so I think for us is, what is the story we want to tell? Who are these characters and where do they need to go? And within that, we wanted to answer some big questions about the movies. And some of the big questions that we had, we said, here are our answers.
Will, do you wanna chime in?
Yeah, I mean, the characters really drove the story, because when there's so many pieces, there's so much canon, there's so many years of different pieces of unequal canon, and all of that's laid out on the table, and now you have to make a new whole. And so, you know, Rhiann was a mandate, you know, use his discovery of draining, as J.M. Lee described it mostly in his books, but also the darkening. And so we thought, well, okay, we need a character for this. We need a character for that. We need a character to represent each of the views of the different problems, so that each character wasn't in general. Each of the leads was there for a reason. And 3 is a very big number. So we thought we need 3 leads.
So that's the thing. You've got Rhiann is the what's going on with the castle. You've got Deet is what's going on with the darkening. And then you've got Brea doing sort of the lore and the mystery of the whole thing. But they're each looking at it from different levels: the top, the middle, and the bottom. Deet is literally underground, and Brea is literally a princess. You can't get much higher than that, and Rhiann's in the middle. And so that was sort of started to dictate a lot of the choices from the beginning.
And
You know, I have to do a big shout out to the guys too. When you look at that picture right there, they, you know, we said to them, Lisa and I, we really want to see equal representation in this version of the Dark Crystal. Look at that, these incredible female heroes. They crafted the most gorgeous female heroes, not just our leads, but throughout the whole series. So anyway, they deserve a big shout out on that as well.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting also to me, and I'll bet there are fans out there that are going to want to hear from you why in the Dark Crystal there was this you know, another possible storyline could have been in this prequel about the mystics and the Skeksis and all of that. So, and the mystics were kind of absent from this story. So I'm curious about what led to kind of leaving them out of this in a sense.
They feel like so beloved, and they're literally so large, but they also loom so large in terms of this world and this story. We felt like this story is about the Gelfling discovering that the Skeksis, who are their rulers, are evil. That's really this. This is an uprising story. And that the mystics have a part to play. But maybe it's not that part. We wanted to see them. That's why we see the archer and everything. But we really wanted to give them their space and their due, and they take up a lot of space. They're really big. Like I'm literally, they're just really big. So
we have one in the museum. It's really big.
They're real big, and they take a long time to even set up. So that was why we wanted to make sure
let's just also interject that the mystics are like nearly impossible to perform, and so, you know, it was also a little bit of a production choice, and you know, we kind of put them at the end of the series. They do come in, they're not exactly the cavalry, but you know, they come in and are very, a few of them are very helpful, but the actual puppetry of the mystics is the most difficult. We knew that from the beginning. You know, we'd all been reading the making of book to hear in the puppeteer's own words how incredibly painful it was to perform a mystic. And then we learned that ourselves. You know, I know that I actually was just told that a lot of the puppeteers are in the chat right now. And so,
hello.
You know, and in the end, you know, it was a rare individual that could perform a mystic. So what minutes of mystic you have on screen are precious.
It's interesting to hear how all of those different constraints kind of fed into ultimately the decisions that were made. Because it was a massive production, and again, it could have been so many things, right? It could have been there could have been so many different iterations of of the direction that you went. And all of those things sort of factored into that. So as the story was developing, and as these storylines were happening, and the new characters were being conceived, obviously the visual world of Thra was established, but there was a need for a lot more character design and costume design. And I'd like to talk to you, Brian, a little bit about your work. And this is a picture of you, and I'm assuming that's Wendy as well, with Jim Henson.
Yeah.
It's a great picture.
Yeah.
I'm pretending to do some puppeteering there. The only genuine puppeteering I did in the original film was to wind up a bug and let it go. I was always too busy. I was always too busy in the workshops.
Well, you look very busy in this picture. You and
Well,
again with Wendy.
Yeah, I mean, as you can see in the background, there is a very early prototype for a Skeksis.
Right.
And a lot of the stuff I made myself. I sort of glued things on, and I used a lot of plastic soldiers, and I hot glued them all together and then sprayed them, and it just gave a rather baroque, Gothic feel. And that eventually we sculpted everything. But I was just making. I adored working in the Muppet workshop. The spray booth was my favorite thing. And I was anything I could get my hands on, and I would glue together and spray and make things.
So this is flash forward 30 some odd years to the shop again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where we're still like gluing odd things together to make things.
Something's never changed. I want to talk a bit about the designs that you made. Again, you had to sort of go back to the drawing board, as it were, and create a much more expanded view of the land of Thra, of the world that you created. There's so many more characters in the Dark Crystal: Age of Resistance than were in the original film, The Dark Crystal. And I'm curious to hear from you whether some of these characters were, and the look of them, were they things that you had drawn and imagined as part of the world of the Dark Crystal before the Age of Resistance, or were they all kind of generated specifically for this series?
Well, there were recreations, which were of the Skeksis. We recreated some of the originals, and then we had new ones in. But of course, in the original film, we only had a couple of gelflings, and I don't know how many gelflings we had in this one. And so there was a lot to do in a very short period of time, which was fascinating. And indeed, my original designs for the original film were a long time ago. And although they reflected some of the things of what I drew in its day, I mean, I used sort of references for it. But when I was doing this, I just sat at a drawing board and made it up. I didn't look at any reference at all. Because somehow I knew what the world of Thra was, and the secret to the world of Thra is everything is connected to each other, everything is alive, everything is there for a reason. So there are certain sort of rhythms and forms that are linked to each other. So it all came out in the way I was drawing. I mean, the biggest challenge, of course, was doing the gelflings with all these different tribes, is to somehow make them all feel like they were a race of beings, but also they were all separate from where they came from and what they did.
I'd love to talk a little bit about how that worked, the process of you being in England, where you and Wendy live, and you creating these paintings of the characters and the costumes, and then sending them to the shop, which mostly was some of which was built in LA and some in outside of London. But the designers were working off of these sketches, which is really interesting. Lisa, maybe you want to say a little bit about that, how that process worked, and kind of how it went from a sketch like this to something that the designers were building from.
Yeah, we were, first of all, we cannot underestimate in any way how lucky we were to have Brian and Wendy on the show, because just to have that firsthand creator be able to continue the creation and continue the world building in such a pure way. I mean, it was magical for everybody who had a chance to work with them. But the third Froud is Toby Froud. Yes. And so Toby, their son, there he is, he actually joined us in LA. He's been working in stop motion animation in Portland, and he's a fantastic sculptor and a filmmaker in his own right. So he came down to LA and worked as a kind of intermediary with Brian and Wendy and with our shop. And you know, people in our shop understand well how to build this kind of puppet, but the design, but transcribing the specific design and making it really feel faithful to the Froud look and feel. Toby was so helpful. I know Brian can't say enough about. Brian, go ahead and say how much you feel about Toby working on the show.
Well, yeah, I really needed him to be my eyes and ears and translate. You know, because sometimes I get rather over animated, and he'll say what he meant to say was, but he was brilliant at that, because he'd been raised in our household with Wendy, and the brilliant sculptor that she is, and is that he knows our work so well. And I mean, it was fascinating for me to see what the first maquettes and things that they were making, the costume people were making, and it was something about it was wrong, and I couldn't figure out why it was coming out not looking right. And then I suddenly realized, and I remember speaking to Toby and said, why don't you tell everybody when they look at my drawings, I mean what I draw? And what was happening, everybody was trying to tidy up my drawings. And once they realized it meant to be right, everything was asymmetrical and lopsided. What everybody was doing then was brilliant. I can't say how delighted I was when everything arrived in London. But also we did here at our kitchen table with Wendy and I, we did some mock-ups of the Gelfling costumes, just to show people what we meant by the layering, because there's lots of layering and lots of organic shapes and how all that pieced together. And so
that's such a fantastic point. And I think it's so important to say, like you just did, Brian, that it's it's that amount of control, that sort of care with that creative process that results in something as special as what you all made together. Is that taking that time to say, no, that's not quite right, and going back and doing it and letting it sort of have the character that it needs to have. And
it's a very interesting problem, because with puppets, because I always say, and Louis knows I say this, that puppets do hardly anything at all, and so they need lots and lots of help in one way.
You're not as polite when you say that to me.
So the costuming of puppets, they aren't just costumes, they are the puppet itself, they are the character. And so there's a lot of information that has to be imparted in what the costumes look like, what the shapes, how they allow the movement, and so costume is vital in what we do. And so what we do like to get that right. And also what's one of the most extraordinary thing is that a lot of the things we do, although we're talking about the mystics being large creatures, a lot of the things in the movie are small creatures.
Yeah.
And the Gelflings are small, but our intention is that you see this on a big screen. And so detail literally is important. Not is it important emotionally, but it's important that you don't have a sense of scale, that you lose yourself in a fully formed world. So that's why we spend a lot of time on the costumes.
Well, you could see here from this picture of the shop, and this is the shop in England, is that right? Or is this?
This is our costume shop in LA.
Yeah.
We opened up a second shop in Los Angeles. We have a creature shop in Burbank and the creature shop had the sculptors and molding and casting and painting of the faces. And this whole separate shop, it was huge, was costumes. And so we had amazing hat makers, dyers, just everything that you would do for costuming alone. And, as Brian was saying, the details on the costumes are so extraordinary. You can get as close as you want to them and see every tiny bespoke piece of embroidery or jewelry or, shells and jewels. It's just a remarkable achievement.
There's a hat that the seamen wear. They're seafaring. And if you looked at closely what Brian designed, it was a sea creature. You'd have to look very close at the hat in the back, that it had the design in it. And it was just things like that that were so beautiful and brilliant.
I remember going there and they gave me a tour of all the things, including the wig department. There was a department just for the hair. I mean, of course there was. None of it's real. It all has to be made by hand. And they showed me the three sisters. And they showed me, this is the back of their head, mind you. This is just their hair. And they were braided in different ways, because each of those characters had a different relationship to being a princess. And so the costumers took their character and put it into the braids of their hair that would rarely be seen. That level of detail, that love for the project is what makes a Henson project unique.
And then Louis spends 10 months getting it dirtier and dirtier and throwing it around and blowing it up. It's fantastic.
That's the job. Well, let's talk about that a little bit. The scale of the production was enormous, and we have to talk about the fact that that you sort of dove in and made this commitment to this sort of epic 10-part series, using practical puppets, and not using computer generated characters. That is an enormous leap, and I'd like to hear Louis from you, and also from Lisa and Halle, and what was behind making that decision. And like you just took like a deep breath and said, we're going to go for this, and what kind of challenges it presented for you?
Well, I was never meant to direct everything. I just fell in love with it. I dove so deep into the world of the Dark Crystal. We had worked previously 6-7 years on the sequel, or the evolution of the sequel onto that prequel series. We had spent months with Will, Jeff, Javi, and everybody in the writer's room crafting the story. I had learned how puppets work, and like Brian says, don't work. I had, all the detail, everything I'd put in, I really felt like it was, frankly, my personal greatest feat. I had never done something that size, and got so excited that I said, and it's crazy to do so because no one does that, I will direct every episode. And not only will I direct, I will camera operate, I will oversee the editing, oversee everything. And I was just like, it was, I think it needed this, somebody. It's so exhausting. I mean, it's so much work, and everybody works so much. We needed one person to come in and just be the champion of the whole crew, all the puppeteers, everybody working at the shop, and I had so much passion that I decided to do it all. But it was absolutely exhausted. It's funny because now there are moments of last year and the year before, that I actually do not remember. I literally blacked out. I remember the Dark Crystal, but I don't remember anything else. I was solely Dark Crystal focused. I'm like, when did we get this couch? I asked Cameron, my wife, who also was a producer on this. I was just like, hey, remember you said you loved it. I was like, I have no recollection of this. And that's the Dark Crystal. He inhabited me, and I had to give it everything to it, and and not only me, everybody that you see on this picture, all the other pictures, everybody on this call. Everybody gave so much to the Dark Crystal. That's not something you can do it just like, it's not your simple TV show or movie. It's all consuming.
It seems so. I think it'd be great to hear a little bit about, of course, many years passed between the production of the original film. The production took place in 1981-ish. And a lot of years have passed since then. Some things have not changed, that you put your hand in a puppet and it moves around from the strength of a human body. But a lot of the production styles have changed. I wonder if you could, if any of you could talk a little bit about just the puppetry techniques that were different or maybe the same between the original production. In this picture, Jim Henson is puppeteering next to Kathy Mullen. This is a famous picture from back then. So what has changed between then and now?
Can I just leap in on that one?
Yes.
What was interesting is that in the original film, most of my design was to hide things, to hide the puppeteers. And so the way certain creatures look came from that. And what was different about now with modern technology, for the first time, we could use green screen. I mean, it's been around for a long time, but we didn't have it in our day. And that was liberating, I have to say, that suddenly we didn't need to hide the puppeteers so much. We could have them on the outside and go back to some very, basic, good traditional classical puppeteering like Bung Raku. What do you think, Louis?
Yeah, I think it's exactly this. But what was most important for me and everybody again on production was to keep the texture, keep that Freudian, what we call the Froud water, that sort of like the patina, just like making it feel as real as the original felt, because adding too much digital enhancement or digital background to it all would have damaged it and would have not made it feel as real as it felt. So, for example, in this picture, you're seeing a puppeteer dressed in blue. Actually, it was just the puppeteer just animating the light for the little chrysalis creature that flies around Brea and leads her into the bottom of the citadel, so that it helps us remove that puppeteer from the set. But everything you see around him is built 2-3 stories high. Everything we could make practically, we would do practically. Our cameras, although are digital, but we try to use anamorphic lenses, 70 millimeter or size sensors, and we were trying to get the feel and look of the original movie. We only wanted to make, for the audience, it was so much about the fans, but also the new fans, for the new fans to watch our show and then go on to Jim's movie and watch it and not feel like it was something else completely. So that's what we try to go for every time on every shot and every scene.
And Barbara, what hasn't changed? Because you said what's changed and what hasn't is the puppeteers.
Yeah.
These were creative warriors that worked on this show. They were unbelievable. I mean, when Becky Henderson performed Deet, she just breathed life into it. So all these characters and these puppeteers were extraordinary. And another thing that happened with Louis is that he developed this trust with them, because even though they were all masters of their craft, I mean, Alice Dinian on Brea, incredible. It's that, you know, Louis was doing things like Steadicam, which they had never been used to. They're like, but I can't see my puppet, because one of the things the performers do is they need to see their puppet. And he was just like, trust me, I see you and I see your performance. So there was this sort of interesting new way for the puppeteers to work, but they just brought their A game. And again, they were just so, you keep hearing this like recurring theme, passion, passion, passion. All of them did, and we were lucky to have some of the original puppeteers from the movie as well, Louise Gold. So anyway, I just want to say that stays the same, but a little bit different way they were directed.
You know, I know from the things I know about the Muppets and Fraggle Rock and other sort of Henson related characters and productions, that it's most often the puppeteers that provide the voices for the characters, that's sort of one expression, that sort of control over the expression of character. But for Dark Crystal, for the film to some degree also, but certainly for Age of Resistance, the puppeteers, from what I understand, were typically not the voice actors. So was that new for a lot of the puppeteers, or was that something that they were already accustomed to?
I could speak to that. You know, it was very unusual in the first movie to replace the puppeteers' voices. So, you know, when Jim did that originally, that was a big break from tradition. But it really worked, and it feels like, you know, it felt like we were, you know, working in the tradition of the film in doing this again. The funny thing is we went into it thinking that we were going to cast maybe star voices for those 3 lead characters. And we had some people on the lookout for like up and coming actors, like young people to play those 3 roles. So the one thing that did shift is we really didn't know that we were going to cast movie stars and giant stars in all the parts. Like that's just something that was like a snowball that started and then just kept going. And I think I give so much credit to Taron Egerton, who committed to it when nobody was involved with it. And he was pretty big to play Rian. And then after that, it just, you know, the voice side of it became big and became its own production in a way. But we were also happy to keep puppeteer voices in some of the roles. And at the same time, I want to say it wasn't a compromise to have, you know, actors do the voices and puppeteers do the performance, because we went in at the beginning knowing we were going to do that. We were actually in some cases casting different puppeteers than we normally work with. We met new puppeteers. I had only tiny bit worked with Becky Henderson, for instance, or Neil Sternberg, who plays Rian. I never worked with him. And, you know, we opened up auditions in England and really were looking for people who had an extremely delicate actorly form of puppeteering. And, you know,
Very subtle.
it's a different kind of cast, and everybody was an actor. It was incredible.
Yeah, it's beautiful. What are we looking at in this picture?
That's Becky.
Yeah, that's Becky. That's Becky. It was, I think, one of her first scenes, if I remember well. It was a very subtle scene when, you know, she goes around these creatures that all light up together, and she has to, you know, bring in her, you know, how amazed, the awe of nature. She's, like Jeff said, connected with nature, and she discovers the world above, and the world comes alive, and she's in awe, and it's
amazing.
This is where she realizes that everything in Thra is connected.
Oh my God.
What Brian was saying. This is the moment that Deet has that realization, where she feeds the one, and you watch all the other lights. So what we were telling the audience,
her performance was absolutely extraordinary. I mean, the combination of the performance and the sort of dizzying world was so like you were not distracted from her as a character, even though there was so much happening visually surrounding her. I think it's a real testament to the way the characters were written and conceived and performed, that you really believed her. It wasn't just something shiny happening. It was like you were having her experience. It was
what you have to understand is it's not only the lead characters that are puppeteers, everything is puppeteered. So in this image, you see every creature in the trees that has one or two puppeteers in it, moving it. The plants are moving. It's a couple of people underneath those rostrum moving everything. It really takes a village to make a frame come to life. We shot this on a soundstage, so we need to add wind and mist. There was subtle rain on that scene. It was really, really a beautiful scene. And you see we have this everything is built on a rostrum. We add real moss. We have gardening people. We have real insects. We have so much happening on every frame, and we had to plan perfectly in order to improvise and make everything come to life. It was really great, and like Lisa said, I made it very difficult for them because I changed the techniques of puppetry, of the way puppets had been shot, since the beginning of the cinema. It was just basically one camera, pretty much static, or a little bit of a tracking. I was moving around, and every time I was doing a take, it was a different take, and I was running around them. So they almost had to, like they said, trust me, trust their puppet, trust their arm, and then know that what they were doing was right. So they didn't see what they were doing, but they were feeling what they were doing. There was a little bit of, the sort of like Zen master thing happening at one point. They had so much command of their everything, their puppet and their joysticks and everything moving around, and it was really, really fantastic.
I want to leave a couple of minutes for some questions that are coming in from the viewers. But before that, I'd really like to ask you, Lisa, I can only imagine the project felt incredibly personal for you and likely for other members of your family. Your father was extremely proud of the film that he made, The Dark Crystal, and I think it was a very meaningful project for him. So I have to imagine it was a very big range of complex feelings for you to be working on this. Can you say something about what it was like to rebuild and revisit this world?
It was, this was by far my favorite professional experience, the thing I'm most proud of. But the Dark Crystal is very meaningful to so many people in the family. I mean, Cheryl is the #1 fan and supporter of Dark Crystal. She put our whole, helped us get the whole darkcrystal.com website up that got it all going. She runs the fan contests and names the winners and keeps people engaged. And she's amazing and was so helpful, so such a support. I think all of us saw Cheryl many times there, and Brian and Heather, of course, totally supportive. But what made it all so perfect for me was that the show was received well by the critics, and that people really appreciated it, because all the way through, we loved it so much. It's like anything else where you're just in love with what you're doing. And I just thought this will be the greatest heartbreak of my life if it isn't appreciated. And so, I was so happy, for everybody here on this panel that their work was received well by the critics, because it was such an unusual show, and who knew if it would resonate.
I think that's great, and I think it's really true of the fans. The critics like the show, but I think for this world, the real critics out there were the fans. That was who to impress, and it was just so loved, and that is a very, very tall order to revisit and rebuild this world and have it be so embraced. I want to ask a few audience questions, if I may. Someone wants to know how much the production drew on the material in the archive, right? Reviewed material from the original movie. How much of that was referenced in and migrated over to the design of the series?
A lot, right? We had we had all the designs. Actually, the audience had all the fans. We had, you know, the world of the Dark Crystal, Brian's book. We had it, and we were looking at every little page and seeing those little creatures, those doodles. Yeah, exactly. That beautiful book, and saying, look at this is amazing. We'll call it the and you know, right, Jeff and Will, that's what we're doing. There's so many creatures that
Well, we often found that the answer was in the Dark Crystal was there's a creature for that, right? And so everything you notice, there's a creature for that. We got to deliver a message, there's a creature for that. We need to clean the thing, there's a creature for that. And so there's a lot of, we would have everything up and it would inspire us, and we would use that, and sort of it would become a thing, or it would start a dialogue that would lead to a new thing. And so a lot of it was this blending, I think, of the old and new, because what we didn't want to just say was like, there's something beautiful that Brian made. Now we're just going to like put that on screen for no reason. Everything had to have a reason. This world has to live. And so it was a lot of that dialogue. But like, yeah, we had all the archive, all the artwork. It was inspiring. It was on the walls. It was everywhere, because it's a
pretty wild experience to sort of, you know, kind of describe a creature you'd made up that you need to do a thing. And then a week later, you get like a hand-drawn sketch, like, oh, well, Brian drew it. And you're like, oh, Brian Froud just like, I had a stupid idea and Brian Froud just drew it. Cool. Act like that's normal.
Yeah,
and
that what he drew is better. That's better. Great, moving on.
Yeah. Oh, that's totally what I meant. That's what I meant. Just that. Just
my drawings look stupid because you give me stupid ideas.
Well, look, and if it was a bad one, you'd be like, oh, we screwed it up. Sorry, Brian. That was our fault. We sent you a bunch of rubbish.
But we also built some archival favorites, the original minor characters that were, you know, they did prototypes, they did a test with them in the original film. They didn't make it into the film. So Jeff and Will wrote them in, the Grunaks, as the sidekicks for the scientists. So, you know, there was something that was really pulled from archives. Like, wouldn't it be fun to bring something into the show that didn't make it into the movie?
That's great. This is a fantastic question. Which Gelfling clan would each of you belong to?
Stephen.
Which
Stephen. I'm a Stephen.
Okay. Anyone else?
I think it'd be a Vaporin because I like reading and bossing people around.
It's the ones we haven't seen yet.
Ooh,
I'm still convinced there's some hidden ones somewhere.
Good answer. You know, before, well, I'll do something shameless, which isn't completely shameless, but we have at the museum, we have an exhibit that is up, even though no one can see it now, of material from the series, and it's focused around character and costume design. And we're fortunate enough to have a few Skeksis. We have the beautiful maquettes that Toby created from Brian's designs, and you know, as well as projections of the original art that he did. So so it is at the museum, and we'll be ready for everyone to visit once we are back, which I'm hoping will be very, very soon. And also I am very hopeful that we'll be able to add some of these pieces to our permanent collection. We have a very large collection at MoMI of material related to Jim Henson's career, and this fantastic material from this series will take its place as part of that collection, and we feel very, very proud to be able to honor the legacy, to explore it, and to bring it forward into the present and into the future, because it is a legacy that is very much alive and thriving. There's always exciting news about how these characters and stories are developing in real time. We need them now more than ever. So I want to thank you all so much for joining us at this time. It is a crazy time in so many ways. And I really want to thank our audience for being here.
Look who's there. Look who's there.
It's Wendy.
Wendy,
Here she is.
Wendy Froud, the unsung hero.
Yes, she is.
Picture maker for this one.
Yeah, Wendy would just one day decided there wasn't enough creatures in the woods and just used other bits. I tell the story all the time, but I love it. Other bits of other leftover creatures and just assembled them into so much of the life that the reason you're not seeing the same couple creatures over and over constantly watching the show is because Wendy went and made these amazing things out of bits of other creatures. It was amazing. Or just the day she decided that Gelfling needed wing covers. But it just went and made these beautiful, like you forgot, really. Oh yeah. Just amazing, beautiful work. She would make beautiful things.
Wendy's a secret sauce.
The Frouds are the secret sauces.
Okay.
Frouds.
All the Frouds, yeah, and Toby. I must say one last thing that no one knows is that Toby is an amazing director of his own, and I was overwhelmed. It's hard. It's true. I did a lot of episodes, but like I had to have him co-direct some stuff with me, and he did this amazing puppet show within. That's Toby. There's so much poetry in that little puppet show in episode 7. The puppets doing a puppet show. That's all Toby Froud. So the Frouds. Hail the Frouds.
Where it's 1 a.m. right now.
Hail the Frouds at 1 a.m.
It's our 40th wedding anniversary
It's our
today.
wedding anniversary today.
Wow.
Oh, happy anniversary.
Cheers.
Happy anniversary. That's wonderful.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Many, many, many more. Well, thank you all again so much for being here. We appreciate you joining us. We appreciate you joining us in the audience, and we will be back together soon in real life. Till then, take
Thank
good
you,
care.
Barbara. Thank you, Mommy.
Thank you.